Hey nerd, welcome to Where the Streetlights End, the place from which I tell you all about something horrible, historic, or incredibly strange. I'm here to use my master's degree in history to do what truly matters, use an academic lens to analyze the strange things that I hyperfixate on. Today, I'm here to talk about perhaps the most famous and simultaneously most misunderstood historical horror personality. She is called the Blood Countess, the Queen of Blood. She is known as the world's first true vampire. She has even been the namesake of black metal bands far and wide because the stories about her are so damned gnarly. She may be the originator of frightening tales that speak of witches who bathe in the blood of the innocent, or of vampires who drink blood of virgins to stay alive. Today, I will tell you the goriest tale of Elizabeth Bathory, although I believe that her name is actually pronounced Elizabeth, but I'm going to do my best here. Before I get into it, I want to remind you that I have a Patreon where you can go to engage in conversations with me and get more updates and personal information, like personal updates, more details on the things that I do, background info, photographs, sometimes stuff like that. Anyway, the Patreon's the place to be. I think go there if you would like to. I have free tiers as well, just so you can look at some stuff and feel involved. Like the video, comment down below if you have anything to say about anything that I say, share it if you have anyone who might be interested, and subscribe to the channel if you like what I do here. There we go. I've done my mandatory spiel. Elizabeth Bathory. Let's go. What brings her to the top of my list of figures worth studying is the way that her life and her influence on the world has become folklore, despite her being a verified historical figure. The time period in which she reigned, combined with the just absolutely fantastic nature of her behavior, created an entire mythos and led to endless, ever-evolving stories told by people throughout the centuries. Stories told for any reason that you can imagine. Whether it be to warn against the abuse of power, to warn against giving women too much power, because you know how we are, and to villainize the ladies, to simply frighten or to share what people think to be horrific truths. The definition of folklore is stories that people tell, and what sets folklore apart from regular fiction like the stories of Superman or Lord of the Rings is that there is no one official version of the story. Because it is stories told by the people, folklore is told and retold time again by different people, which means that it changes repeatedly. In this way, Elizabeth Bathory is both a true historical figure and also a powerful example of folklore. And because of these things, she has become a queen of horror. Her tale is one that highlights the way our stories influence us and how our cultural norms and social structures in turn influence our stories. Not only is Bathory's legacy one that is fraught with rumor, alterations, and fantasy, but it is one which has been molded by the status quo of her time, which has only been reinforced as the status quo remained dominant throughout the world. Today, I will be starting out by telling you the most dominant narrative of Our Lady of Blood's life. Bear in mind as I go that this is mostly a story. I will go on to explain the investigation and trial for her crimes, and after that I will go over some other stories, some other theories, and more recent ideas that have been formulated by historians. Many historians today are actually working to clear her name because when we look at the real evidence rather than simply listen to the story, things look quite a bit different. So, stick around to the end to hear a rather sobering explanation for the story of Bathory's life and the alleged atrocities which she committed in her time. So, our Elizabeth was born on August 7th of the year 1560 to one of the most powerful families in Europe at the time, the Bathorys. The Bathory family was of the Protestant religion, which doesn't come up much here, but it might be worth bearing in mind when some certain allegations come up. But it was, in fact, a big deal at the time either way, being Protestant. The Protestant Reformation took place officially in 1517. The Reformation set apart those who believed in a type of Christianity that was distinctly different from Roman Catholicism. Catholicism had been the dominant power in all of Europe until around this time, and following the Reformation, there were ongoing religious wars across Europe, between powerful Catholics and Protestants. Power in the region had been destabilized, and along with it, the beliefs, loyalties, and cultures of the common folk. Anyway, Ezherbet, having been born into such a wealthy and powerful family, received an impressive education, one that was generally unheard of for a lady at the time. As a result of that education, she grew into an extremely intelligent and well-read woman. She was able to speak a multitude of languages, including German, Greek, and Latin. When she was young, there were rumors that she suffered from something that sounds today like epileptic seizures. One weird thing. Okay, weird to us, but not super weird at the time, although it seems to have been frowned upon in this specific case. Her parents were cousins. And that's how you maintain a pedigree pure enough to keep all of the wealth under the control of the family, right? These noble families back then, and honestly still not too long ago, from the perspective of an historian, would keep it in the family, so to speak, in order to avoid having to spread any wealth to other bloodlines through marriage. There was also a whole weird thing about believing that aristocrats were chosen by God, and therefore their lineage was blessed in some kind of weird way. Those two things combined, greed and devotion to strange interpretations of the Bible, have been the driving factors behind much of the chaotic shit that has happened throughout the history of the world. One of those things is the inbreeding of royal families. And, as we know today, incestual breeding tends to lead to serious health problems in offspring. That is why so many aristocrats throughout history have had strange and mysterious ailments, were physically frail and psychologically troubled, whether that be from a developmental or behavioral disorder. With Ezherbet, we can see that the mental health thing is notable here, as well as the physical illness. Definitely a product of her time and class. The lore of Elizabeth Bathory emphasizes these unfortunate circumstances of her meat suit, but also presents us with many instances throughout her youth that would really traumatize anyone. These horrors she witnessed may have fertilized the ground within which these seeds of madness were planted during her inception. It is said that as a girl, she bore witness to many horrific scenes that would twist her perception of morality, mortality, and honestly, reality itself. One example that we find within the stories of Ezherbet is one where she, as a child, witnessed a man being sewn into the stomach of a horse, to die slowly of suffocation in the thick hot meat of the creature's innards. Is good. Not ideal, right? This was supposedly the punishment for theft. It seems a bit dramatic of a sentence for theft, but I'm not an aristocrat, so what do I know? Either way, as the tale is told, little Ezherbet found herself laughing heartily at the sight of this man's gruesome and slow execution. This is one of many tales that has been told through the ages regarding her cruelty, and honestly her insanity, from a young age. There is no real concrete evidence that these things actually happened, or that she responded in such a callous way. But the stories are believed, and they have been repeated and believed again. Historians tend to agree that stories about Ezherbet's childhood and her evil demeanor were woven by the people who felt the need to explain or to understand the horrible things that she did later in life. If she had been a happy, healthy child who had grown up of sound mind and heart, how could she have possibly gone on to inflict the atrocities that she did while she was in power? It simply wouldn't make sense. And honestly, believing that someone could switch from perfectly normal to homicidally insane so suddenly with no prior warnings, that's even more frightening of a thought than someone simply being born bad, right? Or having been traumatized and forced into a mindset designed around cruelty. While the tales of her watching torture and death with a smile on her face as she grew up are likely fictional or at the least hugely exaggerated, violence was commonplace in Hungary at the time. It was normal to punish children and servants with physical abuse, and no one would have batted an eye if a peasant were beaten savagely in front of a child. They were lesser than property of the wealthy people who had power. Public executions were also common at the time, and it is very likely that Ezherbet witnessed several in her youth. However, she was certainly not the only child to see such things, because it wasn't considered all that big of a deal. She has been widely recognized as an exceptional beauty, particularly by the cultural standards of the time. There is an existing image of her, which is a portrait from 1585. The portrait shows off her high forehead, which at the time was seen as a desirable trait, which indicated wealth and nobility. Her skin was also extremely pale. Some people go crazy for that shit. When our lovely psychologically damaged young subject was 10 years old, she was engaged to a young man from another powerful Hungarian family. This young man was 15 years old, and he was called Count Ferenc Nadasdy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Nadasdy. Nadasdy, right? Nadasdy. Following their engagement, our literal child, Elizabeth, moved into the Nadasdy palace and was trained in how to handle the dual estates of the family brought together through their matrimony. There is an embellishment to this part of the story, which is likely just rumor, but which is also a powerful addition to her lore. This tidbit states that Elizabeth had an affair with a peasant while she was living at the Nadasdy palace in those early days. Remember, she was 10 years old. And this is weird, gross thing for someone to fabricate about a 10-year-old, 10 to 13-year-old. She is said to have become pregnant as a result of this affair and was forced to give the baby away in secret so as not to soil the family names. The tale goes on to claim that her fiancé then castrated the peasant and threw him to a pack of wild dogs. Classy. Stories like this surrounding Bathory and her husband are abundant, while Elizabeth has a pervasive reputation of being, sex positive? That's a good way to put it. She was a little bit loosey-goosey, right, in her morals, so they say. And if she wasn't, people sure as shit believed her to be, and still believe that she was. And her husband, Nadasdy, has been very well known for his violent nature and bad temper. So, of the rumors you may find about this pair, many will involve Elizabeth's sex life and Nadasdy's cruelty. The two were married when she was 14 years old, so 4 years later, in May of 1575. The wedding welcomed 4,500 guests and was a 3-day-long celebration. As a wedding gift, Elizabeth was given the craggiest, gnarliest, spookiest castle in Hungary for her to keep as her own. The couple barely saw each other at all after they were married. They didn't have their first child together until 10 years later, which was extremely weird at the time. For anyone, but especially for royalty, right? It's quite possible that they were simply far too busy to get it on, or, as you can imagine, with arranged marriages, maybe they weren't that into each other, so they didn't make it a priority, you know? That seems fair to me. Anyway, 3 years after they were married, Nadasdy went off to fight the Ottomans, so he wasn't really around to be making babies either way. Elizabeth went back and forth between her castle and her husband's land during this time. She was the one keeping shit running for both estates while he was away at war. I imagine this is one part of her life where the fancy education came in clutch for her. So Nadasdy earned the nickname Black Knight of Hungary because of his reputation for ever-increasing cruelty in war. He supposedly loved torturing people, and even playing games with severed heads. Why do we talk about his wife more than we talk about him? He seems pretty fucked up from the sounds of it, right? Kind of brutal, yeah? The long war with the Ottomans drained Hungary's wealth overall. War tends to be a huge financial burden on the countries involved, and this was no exception. Elizabeth herself, however, was able to stay rich while all of the other royal families in the area struggled. This is because her husband, the frightening beast of a man, was constantly sending home treasure from his conquests in battle. The couple actually accumulated so much wealth that they ended up lending money to the Habsburgs, which was Hungary's ruling family at the time. The Habsburgs needed to borrow money in order to keep Hungary in the war, and Elizabeth and her husband were the only people around who had anything to give. So after this, the actual king of the country was in their debt. As you can imagine, the king being in your debt means that you have a whole lot of power. I think there's a modern example of something like this happening. Like the leader of a country accepting a shitload of money from someone, and so then that someone has unchecked political power despite not really earning it. I don't know, that seems familiar to me for some reason. I don't know. It is said that much of the quality time shared between Ezerbet and her asshole husband during the Long War was spent with them torturing servant girls together. We know Nadasti loved him some violence, but throughout this time, Ezerbet had apparently also taken a liking to it. While running the lands and both castles on her own, she had been in charge of a whole lot of servants and peasants. And as I stated earlier, it was very normal to punish those people quite savagely for even the smallest trespasses. Ezerbet had become quite accustomed to her role as punisher of lowly servant girls. So, in this little hobby of theirs, both husband and wife found great joy. They would teach one another new, more brutal ways to torture these girls, and applaud one another when they showed great cruelty. You know how when two assholes get together and they do asshole stuff, and they encourage one another to be even bigger assholes, and they both get way worse really quickly, and usually shit gets out of hand and someone blows their hand off? Like, literally out of hand, right? That's basically what happened here. But it really formed and maintained a twisted romantic bond between them, you know? The family that slays together stays together, or whatever. So, one thing that they liked to do together was, allegedly, to roll up a piece of oiled paper, place it between the toes of a servant, and then set the paper on fire. I hear they called it star kicking. Nadasti also reported kitty outside. Oh my god. Okay. Nadasti also reportedly purchased her jewelry like many wealthy husbands do for their lovely wives. However, rather than get her things like diamond earrings, he got her some gnarly clawed glove, which sounds cool and I want it. The purpose of this clawed glove was for his lovely wife to be able to slash at the servants and rip their flesh up. So that's a thing. That's romantic ass jewelry, I say it. Around the year of 1601, a mysterious woman named Anna Darvolia became an important part of Ezerbet's life. She quickly adopted the role of her trusted companion. Gay? Some think so. Maybe. Who's to say? People were not very trusting of this Anna Darvolia, and rumors circulate still today that she was a witch, a spellcaster, an enchantress, an evil magical lady. Locals described her as a wild beast in human form. After she arrived on the scene, it is said that Ezerbet's personality changed dramatically, not for the better. While her husband taught her the joys of torture and inflicting pain, it is said that the enchantress Darvolia is the one who pushed her to actually start killing people. Up until this point, servant girls in Ezerbet's care would die on occasion, but it wasn't really considered strange. Poor people in the late 1500s died quite a lot, and it wasn't really noteworthy to anyone. Unfortunately, after the arrival of Darvolia, the number and frequency of deaths at the Bathory castle started to catch people's attention. Now, Ezerbet and her husband were essentially untouchable, because the king of the entire country was in their debt, right? This meant that she could pretty much do whatever the hell she wanted and no one could stop her. When her husband Nadasti died, for example, the king still owed him like 18,000 gulden. That was a lot of money, and he now owed that to Ezerbet, right? You follow me? So, local pastors started to grow suspicious of what was going on in Bathory's castle because she kept asking them to perform funeral rites for way too many girls. She always stated that these girls had died of cholera or of unknown and mysterious causes. Classic. It is said that at one point she came to them and asked them to bless one weirdly big coffin. The pastors, supposedly, felt like something was off about it, and they came to the conclusion somehow that the coffin contained 3 separate dead servant girls. The allegations and accusations and rumors surrounding what may have been happening to Ezerbet's servant girls grew so loud and so brutal that everyone began to firmly believe them, if they hadn't been convinced before. Everyone in the whole area was now terrified of her, and the locals were all certain that she had been going on a bloody rampage within her castle walls. People were warning their daughters to never set foot inside, because she would sometimes go around looking for girls to hire, to help out around the castle, right? And lots of these poor girls, it seemed like a cushy job, or, better than nothing. but the families stopped allowing their daughters to go and work for her in the castle, which is like one of the only jobs for a young woman back then, you know. But they were warned to never set foot inside that damn castle. And the stories being shared through the land were so intense that one day, a pastor personally took it upon himself to pull Bathory aside after a religious service and denounce her as a murderer directly to her face. He told her that she had been acting very suspiciously and that everyone distrusted her. He explained that everyone believed her to be a brutal slayer of girls, and he told her that if she wished for these rumors to be put to rest, she needed to let them exhume the girls and publicly examine them. This would allow her to prove that they died for normal reasons and they were not viciously killed by Elizabeth herself. Elizabeth reportedly snarled at the pastor who confronted her and warned him that these accusations would not be tolerated. He repeated that all of the rumors could be put to rest if she would just allow the bodies to be dug up and examined. She, supposedly, threw an absolute fit and stormed out of the church. Apparently, her husband was able to appease the pastor and get him to back off, and no bodies were exhumed. Now, Nadazdi died of an illness in 1604, and it is said that with his passing, Elizabeth's behavior changed for the worse yet again. She was now 44 years old. People claim that she began to grow even more violent and emotionally volatile. It is possible that she was dealing with grief the only way she knew how. And I mean, on top of that, although her wealth never suffered, the long war did take its toll on Hungary and everyone within it. Perhaps it was grief, stress, loneliness, all that normal stuff that makes people angsty and weird, right? Whatever the cause of her psychological downturn at this time, this is when she became entirely obsessed with torturing young girls, as the story goes. She wasn't just punishing servant girls who stepped out of line anymore. She began going into towns in her lands and collecting girls to bring back to the castle with her for the sole purpose of brutalizing them. Remember how I said it was commonplace for lords and ladies to go down into their lands and collect poor people to come work at their castle? Well, now she was doing it for the purpose of torturing them, right? Her companion, Anna Darvoli, was still in the picture at this time, and the two of them supposedly enjoyed this horrible hobby together. But more than that, Elizabeth enlisted the assistance of some other people to engage in this fucked up sort of servant girl torture ring thing. It became a group activity, if you know what I mean. The torments inflicted upon these girls would start out with kicking and slapping and punching, but after a bit, the imagination kicked in and the little torture squad of sadistic assholes would slowly push things further. They would treat them like pincushions, skewering the lasses with needles, and they would be branded with hot coins if they were accused of stealing. Stuff like that, you know? One particularly gruesome game that Elizabeth is said to have played is that she would stab needles into the fingertips of the girls and tell them that if it hurts, they were free to pull them out. And when they did pull the pin out of their fingertip, she would then chop the finger off. I've seen this game, a torture game, referenced in so many references, sources about Bathory. It's ridiculous. A story is told that one time a servant grew terribly ill and was unable to get out of bed for the day. And Elizabeth went to her and was so insanely pissed off that she bit a massive chunk out of the girl's face. Like a rat lady. There were, in fact, rumors of cannibalism. You know how we like cannibalism around here, right? I wonder if that whole face-biting incident, right, is what sparked the cannibalism stories. Like, she bit the chunk off and people were like, she eats people. And that could be all that was. To be fair, though, it's not far-fetched at all after hearing all this other shit that she was supposedly doing, right? Like, I wouldn't put it past her to eat them if she did all the other stuff also, you know? I know one of my most well-liked videos on here is the one where I discuss cannibalism in history. Here's an example of probably cannibalism. Cannibalism has been recorded quite a bit with individuals. Like, or, like it's something that people do on an individual level because they're fucking weird, right? But it's rarely a cultural thing. It's not something that groups of people do on a regular basis, but on the occasion, one weird motherfucker will enjoy munching on other humans. She was so weird that if the stories are true, even half of them, I wouldn't put it past her. So, someone named Ilana Joe, one of the people that Elizabeth had recruited into her little torture squad, has been quoted as saying, "Anywhere she went, she looked immediately for a place where we could torture the girls." According to this, it was her primary pastime, it seems. The fear of Bathory among the people grew more and more intense as more stories were being told by those who had witnessed her bloodthirst, and as the bodies of servant girls continued to pile up. But no one could do a damned thing about it. She controlled the entire country's wealth, was untouchable by the king. The people that she was torturing and killing were peasants and slaves, and as per Hungarian law, they had no rights. They weren't really people. So, they couldn't call the fucking cops on her, right? They couldn't tell on her to anyone because there was no one above her to tell to, right? She went on an unchecked bloody rampage for years while everyone else just had to sit there and deal with it. And speculate. They'd be speculating. It all happened inside of her castle walls, right? And the only real evidence they would ever see was bandaged women who had been injured and those coffins. Always with the coffins, right? Until, like many bastards throughout history, she done fucked up and killed someone that people actually did care about. If you watched my episode about the Bender family, you may recognize the beginnings of a trend here. Killers tend to go unnoticed, or at least unstopped, so long as they kill people who are easily forgotten or overlooked. But eventually, damn near all of them who get caught make the same mistake. The Benders ended up killing someone with powerful family members who was missed immediately. Elizabeth did very much the same thing when in 1609, she decided to open up a fancy school for young women. These would be girls from families which were better off than the peasants she was used to tormenting, mind you. One of her reasons for opening the school was income. She had slowly eaten through her wealth and felt it would be a good way to get some extra money, and new fresh source of prey for her bloodlust, yes? Her beloved companion, Darvulia, also died this year in 1609, I believe of a stroke. So perhaps Elizabeth was suffering from grief again, much the same as she had been when her husband died before. Maybe she was acting out. So she found tens of young women from rich, loving families and brought them to this fancy school, as the story goes. And I'm sure you can imagine what she did then. If for some reason you've missed one of the major points that I've been laying forth, Bathory really just liked torturing and killing girls, if we are to believe the dominant narrative. So she got herself some money from their tuition and she went on to satisfy her need for the torture and killing of girls by torturing and killing these girls who had powerful and very worried parents, right? So these worried parents contacted Elizabeth to ask how their girls were, and they received a very stupid and upsetting and suspicious answer from the headmistress. She reportedly claimed that there were no girls left at the school. They were all dead, and it was no fault of hers whatsoever. So what had happened, you see, was one of the girls was crazy, and she was jealous, and she freaked out because she liked all of the other girls' jewelry. And she was so jealous that she actually murdered all of the other girls, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. I imagine she was really, really fast and super strong, and that's why no one was able to stop this one girl's rampage. And so this one girl killed all of the other girls, and then she killed herself because she felt really, really bad about it right afterward, right? So yeah, all the girls were gone, and Elizabeth was like, really sorry, it's crazy how that happened, but there was nothing to be done for it, so probably just move on, stop calling. And no one believed this at all. In fact, people in town had been seeing a whole lot of young women with burned hands and disfigured faces following Elizabeth around. One girl actually escaped and ran into town, being found with a knife still sticking out of her foot. So, the story that Ezebet gave did not check out, and everyone had been seeing girls who had been obviously terribly injured in her care. So Ezebet was very publicly surrounded by young women who had been tortured, and now that rich girls were among these victims, people did care. They cared a lot. And so, the families of the noble girls went to the king and demanded that he do something about this, and he finally did. In February of 1610, an official investigation was started against Elizabeth Bathory. Hundreds of people confirmed that they had witnessed her violence against her girls, and based on their testimony, the estimated number of them that she had killed ranges from around 175 to 200. The walls of her castle were supposedly so deeply stained with blood that they couldn't be washed enough to return to their original color. People nearby and servants working within the halls had been hearing screaming nonstop for years. While none of the people questioned at the beginning of the investigation claimed to have personally witnessed the beatings or the torture or the killings, many did state that they had been watching a weird amount of quick burials taking place all around the castle, and the graves never had stones or plaques to show who had been laid to rest. So they had never seen her actually hurt anyone, but they had heard the screaming, they've seen these weird burials, and she was acting fishy. Everyone saw her being fishy, is what it comes down to. The man leading the investigation was, I don't know how to pronounce this, Georgie, Gyorgy. Georgie? I'm gonna call him Thurzo, because that's his last name, Thurzo, who had actually been a very close friend of Ezebet's husband, Nadasti. This meant that he had a pretty serious conflict of interest here. He didn't want to betray his friend by leading the charge against his widow, but he was also loyal to the king and did honestly know that this chick was doing some fucked up shit. So he claims. So in order to find a way to do the right thing and also not totally betray his friend, he went to Ezebet's sons and asked what they thought he should do. Together, they decided that yeah, she did probably need to be stopped. It had gotten out of hand, and honestly, it was tarnishing the family name anyway. However, they didn't want her to be taken to trial. If there could be a way to stop her and even lock her up, to keep her from continuing her rampage, that would be great. But to have her stand trial would be a huge embarrassing spectacle that they weren't okay with. During this conversation, her sons never bothered to try to argue Ezebet's innocence. It seems that they knew she was insane and had been up to terrible shit, and it was too obvious to try to defend her. They just felt that having her publicly charged and punished would be far too shameful, and to have her take the stand in front of other people in her mental state would only be further shame on the family. Thurzo and the king went to Bathory's castle for Christmas Eve dinner after about 10 months of investigating her crimes. He wanted to be as sure as possible that she was guilty before trying to arrest her, he said. And one of the best ways to do that would be to spend some time with her and genuinely see how she was faring and how she behaved. Reportedly, she behaved relatively normally. She was gracious, friendly, and generally normal, right? Though she seemed somewhat anxious the whole dinner. The weird thing, according to Thurzo, is at the end of the dinner, she came and served him and the king a super weird gray cake that was shaped like a pretzel and had a communion wafer in the center of it. He claims that although it smelled freaky and looked freaky, he and the king did try to eat it, and it tasted super weird and they both felt like they were going to barf, like immediately. They believed that she had tried to poison them, and they hurried the fuck up to leave as soon as they could afterward. Thurzo returned to the castle on New Year's Eve, shortly after the weird dinner, and he was sure she was guilty after the freaky poison cake fiasco, and had brought armed men to arrest her. He claims that he was hiding in the bushes that night before making himself known, and he witnessed Ezebet and her witch friend chanting a spell to the sky. As he made his way toward the castle to get inside and make the arrest, he and his men came upon the mutilated corpse of a girl near the entryway to the building. Then, upon entering through the doorway, they found 2 more girls lying on the floor as they died. They heard screams echoing through the halls, and they rushed after the source of the horrible sounds to find the dungeons, where Ezebet and her group of sadistic bastards were in the act of torturing someone. Ezirbet was dragged from the castle that night. As the armed men working for Thurzo and the king searched through her castle, they uncovered and brought out more and more proof of her fucked up deeds. The next day, she was imprisoned in her own dungeon and charged with torture, murder, mass murder, serial killing? I'm not sure that they had a specific word for exactly what she was charged with at this time, but she was locked up in her own dungeon. We'll just stick with that. She was caught. She done got, right? During the trial, 306 different people testified against Elizabeth Bathory to argue her guilt. Among these witnesses were some of her chosen co-torturers, those she had brought into her torture squad, Ilona Joe, who I mentioned before, and who was one of the squad, stated, "The lady beat and tortured the girl so much that she was covered in blood." Her fellow sadists claimed that during that trial, that to their knowledge, the number of murdered girls was around 30 to 50. But staff members and locals were sure that, based on the number of graves they'd seen dug and filled around her castle, the number had to be closer to 200. Members of the torture squad were charged and convicted along with her throughout the trial, some of them receiving the death penalty. Two of them, who were convicted of having done particularly heinous acts, were tortured as their punishment, having their fingers ripped out by iron tongs before being burned alive as their execution. Others, who were perceived as more innocent or unwilling, were simply beheaded, and one, a young man who may not have been a willing participant at all, was simply thrown in jail. Ezirbet was never sent to stand and testify in the trial held against her. In this way, her countenance and statements would not be used to further embarrass her family. She was, however, convicted and sentenced as a result of the trial, and she was banished to imprisonment in her own dungeons for the duration of her natural life, which means locked up forever. It is said that while she remained in prison there within her own walls, pastors would come and try to speak with her and get her to show remorse or guilt for the things that she had done. According to their accounts, she never once admitted to feeling any shame or guilt in her crimes. More often, she would just snarl at them and threaten that someday people would come to save her. No one did, that I know of. She would often claim that she had never actually done anything wrong, and that it was her own servants and those members of her squad who were the real villains. By all accounts, she was not a model prisoner. She was pissed. She was wily. She was not compliant. She was always shouting and snarling and threatening people. To be fair, I would probably do that too. I've been in similar situations, and I'm not very polite for the first bit. Like, if you're for sure going to be locked up forever, though, no matter what, you may as well be an asshole and make people uncomfortable, right? She is a bastard, though. She did really suck. If the popular narrative is to be believed. Alright? So, she's in jail. So, I believe I mentioned early on here that there are a whole lot of scholars who would like to clear her name. Many believe that she is actually innocent, or at the very least that her imprisonment and the trial were underhanded, unfair, and excessive. Some believe that it was indeed her friends in the squad who were pulling the strings and doing the evil. But what reason would there be to falsely accuse, convict, and imprison her if she were not actually a terrible person? There are a lot of possible answers to this question, but the most obvious goes back to the long war with the Ottomans. As you may recall, the king and the whole country of Hungary, in fact, had lost all of their money, gone completely destitute as a result of this long and bloody war with the Ottomans. Elizabeth Bathory's husband, the Black Knight of Hungary, was a very successful and formidable warrior, and so he was sending home tons and tons of treasure the entire time, therefore making himself and Bathory the only people in the country with that kind of enormous wealth. Then, the king had to borrow so much money from them that it was impossible for him to ever pay it back. This made Elizabeth, after her husband died, more powerful and influential than the king himself. Now, no king, or even royal family, is gonna be okay with that. The king had been working to come up with something, anything, to take back the power and wealth that was held and lorded over him by Elizabeth and her husband. This is more than enough reason for any aristocrat to do a massive deception and build a conspiracy to take someone down. As an historian, I've seen worse done for far less. One of the main things used as evidence to support this theory is the way that Elizabeth was not allowed to testify on her own behalf during the trial. Accusations of witchcraft and spell casting by her and her friends were also extremely common, and while there are people who believe in that sort of thing, back then, usually, an accusation of witchcraft was entirely made up to make people look bad. Accusing someone of cohorting with demons and spirits is the most transparent and classic move in the world to try to make someone look evil, and it was done all the time for no purpose other than to tarnish someone's name. It is quite possible that Elizabeth Bathory was a victim of this good old religious trick. And remember, there were religious wars going on at the time. The Catholics and the Protestants were right? So that could play into this a little bit, right? Now, this is not to say that I believe, or even these scholars who defend her, necessarily believe that she was entirely innocent. The laws in Hungary at the time stated in no uncertain terms that servants and poor people were not people at all. It was more than okay to punish them with physical violence, and even okay to kill them if they stepped out of line. Obviously, our modern, evolved ethical understandings and such tell us that yes, that is a bad thing to do. But at the time, culturally, it was acceptable. So, while she was almost definitely guilty of torturing, hurting, and possibly even killing her servants, that doesn't make her any worse than literally anyone else in Hungary at the time. So, yes, that is evil, and she did it, and therefore she's an evil bastard, but even so, she was not exceptionally evil, right? In a comparative or relative sense, when considering the culture and the period. Certainly not enough to generate this sort of rumor mill, right? That is her current story. You feel me? So by saying that she was innocent, no one is saying that she was a good person and she didn't do anything bad. Those who defend her are simply stating that she was likely innocent of the extreme and ongoing gruesome crimes that she was convicted of, like the excessive torture methods and that stuff that I described earlier, right? Or like the statements made that she would torture any chance she got, and she would spill so much blood that it would pool on the ground and stain the walls forever. She probably wasn't actually that bad, right? However, we can also go back and argue that the theory that she was unfairly punished because of political rivalry is also unbelievable. Hang on, I have to change my sit, the way that I sit. There we go. Oh, yeah. It could also be difficult to believe that she was punished as political conflict, right? Because by the time Elizabeth was imprisoned, she was no longer the one in control of Nadasti's vast wealth. That had already changed hands and gone to his sons, their sons, right? Who had long since come of age. Although she was well respected and held in a very high station in her country, true power was not left in the hands of women. It was passed on to the sons or male heirs as soon as it was reasonable to do so. Therefore, the king should not have had too much to gain by going after Elizabeth herself. He would have had more to gain from going after her sons. You know what I mean? We may never actually know the true extent of what Elizabeth Bathory did, or why exactly she did it, but she did do some really fucked up shit. Though the stories that we hear today, the rumors that first led to the inquiries surrounding her, and the statements made at the trial have all been twisted through emphatic retellings as they have been passed from person to person. While the stories told and the testimonies given proved that people in her land were terrified of her and did not trust her, and that she had done a great deal of harm, they cannot be trusted as entirely factual. Even modern, fresh eyewitness testimony can't really be considered factual, in trials today. There has been no actual physical verifiable evidence that her brutality or her punishments were much more brutal than was normal at the time. But the fear that swelled within the hearts of the locals is evidence that she was not a kind or gentle leader. There are rumors of handwritten diary or ledger that she kept, in which she recorded the details of her favorite torture sessions and the names of her victims. Some people have claimed to even read it, but it has never shown up. No one has ever found this supposed ledger as far as I can tell. They say that this diary would be proof all the proof that we need to say for sure what a monster Elizabeth Bathory truly was, but no one has produced this book as of yet, to my knowledge. And when she was imprisoned, all legal documentation about her trial was sealed, which to me screams of hiding things on behalf of those who convicted her, right? Anyway, one strange thing that is mentioned by Tori Telfer, who writes about Bathory in her book Lady Killers, is that today, much of the imagery and storytelling surrounding the Countess has to do with sex. She is frequently depicted in a sexual nature, lounging seductively in bathtubs full of blood, and she has been used as a figure of feminine allure rather consistently in recent decades. And the stories, which started out as exaggerated rumors based on fear of her bloodlust, quickly evolved to include details about her promiscuity, or even that she was a lesbian, which, while she did have that companion Darvolia, and she did seem to only torture girls, which is weird, there's not really any evidence that I know of to suggest that she wasn't straight. I know most of the time, when dudes have dude best friends, in the history books, there's more going on there than just friendship, and that's because men aren't really socialized to be compassionate and emotionally vulnerable with each other. Women, however, are. Girl best friends can be extremely affectionate, and it's not necessarily gay. It's just that we're socialized to think it's normal, while men are often socialized to think it's not okay to hug your bros, if you know what I mean. I personally believe that the obsession with Bathory's sexuality, whether it be her personal preferences or just the need to depict her as a sexual figure, is the result of just people being weird about violence, or part of the whole demonizing her as a woman in a religious society, right? But when it comes to the pervs, a lot of people get into stuff that involves torture and pain, and they get a different kind of kick out of it. You know the type of thing I'm talking about. So probably some kinky fuckers got on the internet, found out there was a lady who was pretty who liked to torture people, and then fan fiction happened, essentially. The fan fiction became folklore. Even before the internet, the stories were probably the result of fan fiction from perverts about Bathory being a slut, you know what I mean? Or from religious people who wanted to include things that would paint her as a sexual deviant to emphasize how evil she was. Because God doesn't like it when girls touch boobs together, or when girls do sex of their own volition at all. So sneaking in little details to suggest that she was promiscuous, or that she derived sexual satisfaction from torturing girls, or that she liked the lady butt, it made her seem even more evil from a religious standpoint, Even cooler for the people who are into that sort of thing. Because really, at no point during her life or her trial, or even while she was still living in imprisonment, was she ever accused of sexual deviance during her life. That's the thing that people just kind of came up with later and added to the folklore stew. Of all the stories told of Elizabeth Bathory's cruelty and bloodlust, there is one rumor that has superseded them all. That is the thing that I have most known her for, and that which has truly given her the infamy that she now boasts. And that is the rumor that she would bathe in the blood of virgin girls, believing that it would give her lasting youth and beauty. The story told that explains the beginning of these bloodbaths is that one day, Elizabeth slapped a young girl so hard that blood burst forth from the girl's face and it landed on her own. And after wiping the blood away, Elizabeth noticed that the skin on her face where the young girl's blood had been was softer and looked to be more youthful and glowing. She realized that the girl's blood had rejuvenated her skin, and she became obsessed with the idea that if she soaked her whole body in the blood of young girls, it would make her entirely youthful again. That is, not true, though. The story I just now told you is entirely fictional, and the tale that she would take these secret baths of blood is almost definitely untrue. None of the servants who testified against her during the trial mentioned anything about it, And you'd think that would be one of the first things from their lips, right? Because that's a super weird thing for her to do with the blood baths. The pastors, who had been distrusting and accusing her from the beginning, never said anything about it. This part of her story, while the most famous and most enduring of the rumors surrounding the Countess Elizabeth Bathory, is the one which is most entirely fictional. Which is a bit disappointing if you're a weird little goth kid like I was, and you were hoping desperately for any evidence that vampires or immortality were real. I hate to break it to you. I'll keep looking, that's for sure, but this lady is unfortunately not that evidence. One thing that is stated repeatedly by those testifying during her trial is that her torture sessions would produce so much blood that it would pool on the floor in massive puddles. So it is true that in a sort of metaphorical sense, she was indeed bathing in blood, but not in the literal sense that we've all been led to believe. One notable point to these statements of the blood pouring onto the floor is that it means she wasn't very interested in saving or harvesting the blood to use as literal baths. I believe that if she were hoping to soak in the tub full of the blood, she would have been like collecting it in a bucket or something, right? Or like exclusively torturing people in bathtubs already so she wouldn't have to transport it later. 'Cause I know carrying buckets of water gets pretty heavy. I imagine blood's about the same, yeah? The rumor of Bathory's blood baths seems to have started over 100 years later in 1729. Wait, yes. The first known mention of this self-care ritual comes from a book that was written at the time called Tragica Historia. It was allegedly written after a Jesuit scholar found the trial transcripts, and I'm unsure if he intended the book to be fiction or if he just took some extreme license while writing it. I believe, along with many other scholars, that one reason that the bloodbath rumor persists is that it fits neatly into our beliefs surrounding women. Now bear with me, as I'm not doing necessarily a feminist, bear with me, dudes, alright? Typically, people find it difficult to believe that women can be murderers, or that they can be this violent, right? It upsets our worldview to accept that women, being so pretty and soft and motherly, could do such heinous things. That's why it's always in the news when a woman does murder. It's a big deal. It's shocking, you know? However, it is very easy to believe that a woman might be extremely vain, or very jealous, or perhaps obsessed with her own beauty and image. And if we add that in there as a motive, we can more easily believe that a woman might commit great violence. It only makes sense if it's done for vanity, or to keep herself beautiful and young, or even to take away beauty from another woman that she perceives as competition. That's easier for people in general to swallow. Associate Professor at Cambridge University, Dr. Anochka, sorry, I'm mispronouncing that probably, spelled Annouchka, Anochka Bailey, I'll be calling her Dr. Bailey from now on, found a little book about Bathory and thought to herself that the Countess was a victim of a stitch-up. She said that she felt there was a serious injustice about it. The book proclaimed that Bathory was the world's most prolific serial killer. That's pretty much how she's introduced everywhere. In 2019, Dr. Bailey began 4 years of research into the infamous woman. She recently published a historical novel called The Blood Countess. Bailey believes that the accusations against Bathory are false. Her work states that rather than a bloodthirsty serial killer, Elizabeth was a religious subversive, a book printer and book smuggler, and a feminist who used her vast wealth and castle to educate and care for countless women and girls, which was more than enough to make her a huge target for a 17th century witch hunt. One thing that Bailey... I knocked my water bottle over. One thing that Bailey notes, which is the simplest to get behind, I think, is that the number of her victims is clearly exaggerated. Whether she was a serial killer or not, many sources claim that she took out around 650 women. And that's a whole lot. Like, no matter how motivated she was, she wouldn't have had time for much else, you know? Well, maybe that's why she didn't have kids. No, till much later. She's too busy doing that. Uh, Throughout Bailey's research, she claims to have found that the girls who were said to have died at Bathory's hands were from a very specific class of people who had lived in the area before the Hungarians came. She found that the girls she could track down were all from noble families, but which had been dispossessed through the political changes and the wars that were happening at the time. It seems as though what Bathory actually did was set up a school that she used as a cover to take in these deposed women, and she gave them a safe space to be and to get an education. This is probably the school that everyone said that she had used as a cover to drain the blood of rich girls, right? And then suddenly all of the girls were gone. You know that one? This could explain, give a better reason why they were all gone and why she didn't want to tell anyone about it, right? So, continue. Based on the tangible, reliable, historical evidence that we have concerning Elizabeth and her castle, which comes from a later investigation into her crimes, there was only one body found in the castle. Dr. Bailey found a whole bunch of tunnels, however, throughout and beneath the castle, and a printing press had been documented at her second castle. Historical records show that after her husband died, she immediately spent a whole bunch of money, like modern equivalent of millions of dollars, on clothes from Venice, which, Bailey claims, looks more like business expenses rather than someone just buying things for herself. That's too much money for personal use, sort of a shopping spree, right? Based on her research, Bailey began to suspect that the girls who came to Bathory's school didn't die, but were part of an underground railroad situation. They may have been smuggled out of the dangerous region where they had lost their fortunes, homes, and families, and had nowhere to go, out to safer places for them to live. There were indeed a whole lot of witness testimonies that there was a weirdly large number of coffins being brought out of the castle. Bailey suggests that these women were being ferried out in these coffins and through the mysterious tunnels below to places where they could be safe and start new lives. While she says she can't totally prove her theory, all of the existing and verifiable evidence can be interpreted in a way which supports this. Like it all lines up and makes sense. And this would have given her some serious political power, because she now had wealthy loyalists in surrounding countries, those women that she had helped rebuild their lives. And she had a damned printing press, and that was a huge deal back then. This would explain why she became a bogeyman, essentially. She was convicted of some seriously heinous crimes, for which many of her supposed cohorts were put to death, yet she was just put on house arrest for the rest of her life, not allowed to speak on her own behalf in public or at her trial. This was a very good way to shut her up, shut down her operation, and strip her of that power. That does, to me, suggest that her proven crimes can't have been all that scary. So what do you think? Elizabeth Bathory, or Elizabeth, has proven to be a fucking fantastic example of the power of stories, both politically and in real time, and over the course of centuries, historically. I honestly truly love the idea that Dr. Bailey came up with about her perhaps helping women escape dangerous situations and travel to places where they can start over. It wouldn't be the first or only example in history of a woman who used her wealth and influence to help others and then was demonized and punished under false pretenses as a result. Classic witch trial shit, you know? I'd be interested if anyone else has done much digging with this possibility in mind. What do you all think? Do you think she really was a terrible, evil serial killer? If she wasn't, does that shatter our personal narratives that we've held for so long? If she wasn't seriously terrible, how is it that rumors of her being evil stuck so well? And how is it that rumors like this even put her in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific female murderer? Is this an issue of political conflict that people blew out of proportion with rumor? Come at me. Tell me what you think. This one was fascinating. I obsessed over this bitch for a whole lot of hours, and I want you to talk to me about it so I can justify the work. Comment down below what you think, shoot me an email or join my Patreon to talk about it in my posts. I've got a free member option on Patreon so you can feel special and make me feel special but not have to give me any money. You can see lots of the posts and communicate with me, but will miss out on some of the more fun things and extra content. I'll also be doing another Patreon giveaway in the fall, where members will receive free handmade goodies from me worth however much their tier level is. So if you like handmade witchy stuff, pop on there and get you some. Otherwise, like this video to give me a boost, share it if you've got any friends who are obsessed with this sort of spooky bitch shit, and subscribe to the channel if you'd like more of me. I do short episodes regularly and pump out these longer in-depth video essays as often as possible. So, for those who stick around to the end of my long episodes, you get personal updates. So, since my last longer video, the one about changelings, much has transpired. We left the apartment and we are doing van life, or were doing van life. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Van and truck life. Because both my partner and I have jobs right now, and those jobs are in different cities, and we have 2 vehicles, and the living situation has been very chaotic, and I have the hiccups for no reason. Anyway, we've got a nice bed in the van, and a jackery for electricity, right? So we've been sleeping in there, but then my partner has to clock into work at one place at 4 a.m., and I work in a different city about an hour away from there, and I start at 9 a.m. So we wake up at around 2:30 in the morning, and I grab all my shit and jump into my truck. And I just kind of sit there, and I stare at my phone until I can fall back asleep for a couple of hours. Then I would get up for work and make my oatmeal on the propane stove, wash my face with hot water from the pot using the side view mirror of the truck, all that good stuff, and then head to work. And then we would meet back up after work and make dinner, hang out with the dogs, and basically get ready to go to bed at 7:30 p.m. again. It's been rough. Until this last weekend, when we got a small travel trailer where I am now. A really nice dude at this RV park / campground we've been staying at was selling it for super cheap. And it had no furniture in it, and it's got a soft spot on the floor, but otherwise it's in all right condition. So we cleaned it out and organized it, and now I've been hopping into the trailer instead of the truck when my partner leaves in the morning, or I will be. I did this morning. When this video comes out, I will have been for a while. At the time I'm recording, I did it once. So I can be a bit more comfortable and a whole lot warmer. It's nice. Except that I forgot my truck keys in the van this morning when I came into the trailer, because I didn't need to get into the truck immediately, and therefore I didn't need my keys, and therefore my sleepy brain didn't register it as something that I needed to grab. And so I'm trapped today because I can't get into my truck. Anyway, but that's why I got to record, so there we go. That's nice. The next things that are happening, my job is over on the last day of May. So this means that I will no longer have any income at all. So if you guys know of anything I can do remote, let me know. I have a master's degree in history. I can write one hell of an email. Or join my Patreon. Shit. Also, the other thing, we're going to the other side of the state. My partner is being transferred to a different facility, so we're hauling the trailer those 5 hours over the mountains to the other side. It's a totally different culture over there, and there's no ocean, so that's going to throw me off, but there are more public lands out there, so we'll have a much easier time finding places to stay for short periods of time for free until I can make money somehow. Yeah. And it's so expensive to be alive over here on this side of the mountains. There's like nowhere that you're allowed to just park overnight for free where it's like safe. At least not within driving distance of either of our jobs, you know. So it's been rough. Anyway, it'll be a good thing overall. Just a big change. And that's the personal updates. You can get more on Patreon if you follow me there, or you can get more personal updates and information about my bullshit if you follow me on other places. And thanks for sticking around. And thank you to my beloved patrons for their ongoing support. I've got Michael Matei, it's my boy, Patrick Finnegan, Christopher Coulson, Smoothie, Andre Davos, Walter Fate, Kai or Sai Magrin, let me know how to pronounce that so I can do it right, Dale, and McBabylegs. And of course, thank you to my free members as well. You matter too. Later, nerd. Leave.